All right, everybody, here back with my father-in-law, Jim Albers, and we're going to talk about where he was and what happened during the Challenger disaster. Um, for myself, I happened to be in high school, a sophomore in high school, in Spanish class, and I remember our teacher coming to the front of the class saying that the Challenger had exploded, and everybody was in, a mass amount of shock because we all knew about that launch because that was the first teacher in space, and that was a pretty dramatic day that I do still very, very vividly recall. And so why don't you tell us about that day for you, Jim?
Okay, that was kind of a sad day, but somewhat surprising. This was 1986. I was Deputy Director of Aerospace Systems and one of the board members of Ames Research Center. There was 4 directors with their director and deputies, and that was 8 of us formed the board of directors with the NASA director of Ames Research Center and his deputy. And during our meeting, we had a board meeting every week. His secretary came running into the board meeting and announced to us that there was a major accident with the Challenger, that it crashed. And boy, that was a sad day for us. But anyway, that we discussed, said, okay, we need, as a center, to help participate with the rest of the space part of the agency to see what we need to do from a public relations point of view, primarily in terms of safety. So within a week, the NASA administrator called a team of people together to address what changes we need to make regarding safety and to also investigate what caused the accident. They asked me to represent Ames Research Center on this national committee to address these major safety issues resulting in the Challenger. So I went to Washington, D.C., and we had a place there, and there were, I don't know, maybe a dozen of us, including the people directly involved, the project manager at the time, for the engineers that made the decision to actually have the shuttle take off during that thing. And one of the reasons the shuttle had the problem, it was a low temperature, very cold that day, and the O-ring couldn't handle the coldness, and that was part of the failure. The issue was we were to find out who discussed the issue and how was it communicated within the agency. That fact that the project engineer of the entire project did not get the word in time to say we should not go. It was too high risk. And so I had the opportunity to work with these people on the space side of the house that were directly responsible for the shuttle. And as a result of our meetings, we learned in a lot of detail in terms of the lack of communication up the chain of command to avoid the risk, as far as losing the shuttle. And so we changed the way we operated in the future to make sure that all channels of communication at all levels, would be open for any major type of test. In fact, to the extent that they didn't even want us to lose a wind tunnel test. So we came back and wrote up a major series of recommendations to the NASA administrator in terms of how we would handle safety of all vehicles in the future. So that 1 week of experience was very interesting to me, to have an opportunity to work with all these individuals that were intimately involved in the space shuttle operations.
And then they ended up, they went to like a double O-ring or whatever they did on that booster rocket, and they solved that problem.
Right.
And
Yeah.
everything.
And then also to make sure that we would not operate under extreme temperatures. It was like below 40 degrees, I believe,
Right.
which was the problem. That O-ring could not handle that temperature. And there were technicians at the time that expressed their concern, but that message did not get all the way up to the chain of command. And that was part of the issue.
So there were protocols that were there, and so
Right.
you're saying if they would have been followed, then they would
Right.
have aborted the launch.
Right. Most
So
likely.
somehow
and we
that
could have avoided the problem.
Right,
But
interesting.
it's lessons learned.
Yeah.
Whenever we have an accident like that, we go through lessons learned, In fact, we did that with every major test at Edwards Air Force Base when I did all the experimental flight testing. After every program, we went to after action review, which was standard practice. And I'm sure they did that on a Challenger, but then because of the complexity and a major loss from an agency point of view, they called the best experts they could from the different centers to come together to make recommendations on what we need to do in the future to avoid this kind of mishap.
All right. Well, thank you, Jim.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Absolutely. Sad for sure. Sad for sure.
So I was involved in a lot of different stuff.
You were.